Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derek, and today I have another War of the Spark deck tech for you guys with another legendary creature and another one. I feel like this is the theme of this set. There's so many that I saw when it was first spoiled, and I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel. And they've just opened up so many possibilities, and once I get to building, there's so many of these legendary creatures that turn out to be so much fun. And this week, that commander is Tolsimir, Friend to Wolves. Now, Tolsimir is 5 mana for a 3/3. So when Tolsimir enters the battlefield, first, you get a 3/3 white-green legendary wolf creature token named Boja, Friend to Elves. It's adorable. You get a friend to elves with a friend to the wolves, and they're just best friends. But that's just where it starts. Then on top of that, whenever a wolf enters the battlefield under your control, first you get to gain 3 life, and then you can have it fight a target creature that your opponents control. So this is just an interesting effect. I think this could be a really fun deck, but up front I do want to be honest and start with some of the negatives that are just inevitable with this deck. One, you have Selesnya, you're lacking red, and even with red, Wolf Tribal it's not the strongest tribe. So if you're going to be playing this, maybe you want to be on theme, maybe you really want to play Boja. The legendary creature tokens are really cool, I love those, so it could be for that. Also, a lot of deck lists may end up looking similar because there's such a limited number of wolves that you can really run, and even then when you're stuffing a bunch in, you really end up with some less than optimal wolves. But this commander does allow you a little bit of flexibility in the sense that you could go heavier towards life gain or heavier towards tokens and wolf tribal because of the effect it has, so it gives some flexibility, but it is relatively narrow. But enough with the negative. Let's get excited about getting Boja onto the battlefield. Let's get some wolves and let's get started. So a general thing with the deck, I decided for this one to go heavier into the wolf tribal / wolf tokens route, mainly because we just did life gain last week and I figured I wanted to mix it up a little bit. But also, wolf tribal is not something you see all the time. So when a card lets you just go all into wolf tribal, why not? Why not try to take it as far as you can and just see how good you can make it? So the first card I want to talk about isn't a wolf itself, but it's going to make you a lot of wolves, and that's Kessig Cage Breakers. In a lot of graveyard-based decks, this card is insane and game-winning, and in this deck, it's still going to be pretty solid because we run a good number of creatures in this deck, and a good number of those are wolves, meaning we're going to have these wolves entering the battlefield, fighting other people's creatures, and maybe dying a lot. We might want to just use one of if we have a 2/2 or a 3/3 wolf, we might want to just use that as a removal for one of your opponent's problematic creatures. If you make a 2/2 wolf creature token, you can kill their Oracle and Moldiah. It seems like a pretty good trade for you. So we're going to be doing a lot of that. Obviously, the tokens won't matter in the graveyard, but we do have a lot of those smaller wolves that can load up our graveyard. And if you get this card out and swing with it, all of a sudden you just have a massive amount of wolves coming onto the battlefield. All these triggers for Tolsimir. And this card can get things silly if your graveyard gets filled up. Another card that is so good in this deck is Lupine Prototype. I really like this card in this deck because it has the downside of it's really never going to be able to attack or block because of the clause with somebody has to have no cards in hand, which in Commander doesn't happen a lot. But forget that. Basically, this reads, when you have Tolsimir out, it's a 2 mana, 5/5 that's going to come in, fight something, and gain you 3 life. This is essentially just a 2 mana removal spell for a creature because, again, there's very few creatures that you're going to have with more than 5 toughness, and a lot of the most problematic utility creatures is just going to take them out. The next one I'm going to talk about is Master of the Wild Hunt. Love this card. So first of all, it produces wolves for you. So on your upkeep, you get 2/2 wolf tokens, which is great because then you have the recurring, gaining some life, having your wolves fight stuff. Every upkeep you can get that. But also what's amazing about this card is it allows you to have your wolves fight again. The thing with your commander is your wolves are only fighting when they enter the battlefield. But with this, let's say you get some wolves out, they might fight, maybe you choose not to fight, and you get a board, and you actually have a bunch of wolves on board, you can wait and not be forced to, at the moment of entering, decide to have it fight something. This allows you to kind of pick and choose when that happens, while at the same time filling your board with more and more wolves. The next one I'm going to talk about is Tolsimir Wolfblood, the other Tolsimir. This is so good in this deck because it's going to buff all your creatures, which is going to give you the white creatures +1, green creatures +1, and obviously Selesnya creatures +2/+2, which is just so good because when it's entering the battlefield and fighting, any type of buff you can give to your creature just makes it stronger removal. But also, this is also able to make another Boja. So you have 2 Bojas, and I'm pretty sure since this one is a 2/2, this is a separate creature, so it's not going to have that whole legend rule thing, I believe. So you can have 2 Bojas out at the same time. That should be the whole point of this deck. I feel like if you get the 2 Voges out, forget everything else that happens. That's a win in my heart. And the last creature I want to mention is Wolfbriar Elemental. This card can get insane. We're in green, so and you at this point I hope you know a little bit about me and my love of ramp. So we're in green. I love to ramp. We're probably gonna have access to a lot of mana. And with this card, if you get enough of that mana, things will get silly. Because every time you kick it, you're getting one of those 2/2 wolves. And normally, okay, you get some wolves on the battlefield, great. But with our commander, getting a whole bunch of wolves, gaining a crazy amount of life, and just fighting everything. The fact that all these token creators can turn into removal spells, and the fact that it's a May, this is great. Because if we're in a situation, maybe you have a crater for something in hand, and you want to hold back, you can have a whole bunch of wolves come down. You don't have to fight anything. You can just leave your wolves there. But if they have some problematic utility creatures that you just don't want to let sit there, and you're not ready for that just explosive turn with all your tokens, forget it. Choose to fight, take out as many creatures as you can, and control the board like that. Moving on to the instance, the one that I just have to talk about is Predator's Howl. This card only costs 4 mana, and it says you just put a 2/2 wolf onto the battlefield. But that's not going to be the case most of the time. It says if a creature died this turn, you get 3 2/2 wolves. And like I just mentioned with their fight mechanic, creatures can basically die whenever we want. With this card, let's just say we have a regular old 2/2 wolf that comes out, whether it's a token or if we just have a small wolf we're going to cast. With this card in hand, we might just choose to have it fight something, just die, just so a creature's died, so we can, for 4 mana, get 3 2/2 wolves, get all the life gain triggers, get all the fight triggers, and all of a sudden we went from, just the 1 wolf to a small army of wolves, or just a whole bunch of fighting triggers, just mowing people's boards down. Kind of the more I talk about this, I talked about it might not be too strong, but you can really affect the board state with this deck. Looking at the artifacts, both Aetherflex Reservoir and Well of Lost Dreams are in here to take advantage of the life gain. I mentioned before, we didn't go too heavy in a life gain because we just did a life gain deck. But this is something that you can definitely lean more heavily into, because with some of these cards I've mentioned, you could be gaining just insane amounts of life in a turn. I mean, it's per wolf entering, so things can get silly with some of the token creators we have. The next one I want to talk about is Sword of Body and Mind. I feel like this is one of the swords that really just kind of gets overlooked a lot, because Feast and Famine, Fire and Ice, Light and Shadow kind of get so much of a reputation in a lot of formats, and they're just very powerful cards. But this one's perfect for us. You get a wolf if you deal combat damage. It also mills. I'm not too worried about that. I just want more wolves. In my mind, this serves as protection for your commander. You can swing in with it. You're probably not trying to commander damage anyone out, or you can just put it on any of your wolves, deal a little bit of damage, get a wolf. One of the best things about this card is, compared to the other swords, it's not as threatening. So you might actually be able to keep this on a creature, and it might not just get immediately blown up as soon as somebody sees it. Moving on to the enchantments, the first one I want to talk about is Feed the Pack. I love this card in this deck. Now, it's kind of expensive CMC-wise. It's 6 CMC to drop. But at each of your end steps, you get to sack one of your creatures and put X 2/2 wolves for that creature's toughness. At the base level, you're going to have some 2/2 wolves around. So basically, worst case, you're going to sack a 2/2 wolf, get 2 2/2s, and you can get those fight triggers and some life gain. But we do have ways to buff our creatures, whether it's a card like Tolsimir, Wolfblood, or even a Metallic Mimic. We can get our creatures to have a pretty decent size, even if they're starting as 2/2s. And then if we're sacking them and getting a whole bunch more 2/2 wolves, all these fight triggers, things can get silly out of nowhere. This is another card I love. It's Wolfcaller's Howl. This one's only 4 mana, and at your upkeep, you get X 2/2s for every opponent that has 4 or more cards in hand. And Commander card draw is a huge thing. I mean, that's not really breaking news to anybody. People tend to have a decent number of cards in hand. And the one thing I love about this card is, if your opponents are down to a couple cards in hand, that's great for you anyway. That's good news. You shouldn't be too mad about that. But if they have a bunch of cards in hand and they have a lot of resources, this is going to reward you for that, and you can get a bunch of 2/2s. And again, with all the fight triggers, these token generators can get out of hand, because you can choose to make an army, or you can just choose to make sure no one else does. And having that flexibility and that level of kind of board control in Selesnya is kind of crazy. The last enchantment I'm going to talk about is Raised by Wolves. So when you enchant the creature, right away you can make 2 2/2s, which is awesome. But on top of that, that creature is going to get +1/+1 for each wolf you control. And like I just mentioned, we can get a lot of wolves, and this can get a lot of power and a lot of toughness onto a creature. And especially with some of these effects that I just said that care about power and toughness, like when you sack it and get a whole bunch of wolves, in combination with this card, just wolves just come out of nowhere. You're multiplying wolves like crazy, and things get insane and way out of hand. Real quick, also with the enchantments, we're running the staples. We're gonna have, especially in Selesnya, we're gonna have Mirari's Wake. I'm gonna run a doubling season. I'm gonna run an Aura Shards. I just wanted to focus more on the wolf-centric cards because I feel like if you're running Selesnya, most people are going to be throwing in that Aura Shards and that Mirari's Wake. Moving on to the sorceries, we kind of have the basics. We have ramp spells, we have some board wipes, but the one that I'm most excited about is Howl of the Night Pack. Howl of the Night Pack is insane. Now, it does cost a lot of mana, it's 7 mana, but you get a 2/2 wolf for each forest you control. Now, looking at the distribution of mana symbols in this deck, we have way more green than white. It's just very heavily green. And we're running a lot more forest than we are plains. And with the ramp, we have a lot of its land-based ramp. And if this card costs 7 to begin with, there's a good chance you're going to have at least 3 or 4 forests out there. That's 3 or 4 wolves. This can get silly over time. If you play this late game with your commander out, you could just have a huge army of wolves, kill everything, gain a bunch of life, and be in a position to finish that game off. Moving on to the Planeswalkers, the first one I'm going to talk about is Arlen, Voice of the Pack. This was kind of an underwhelming card from War of the Spark, but it cares about wolves, and it's going to buff our wolves. So every time a wolf enters, it gets an additional +1/+1 counter, which is great. Again, we care about power and toughness when those wolves are entering to fight things. But on top of that, it can make wolves itself. So it's a token generator, it's going to buff our wolves. It's expensive CMC-wise, but Wolf Tribal, it does what we want it to do. The next one I'm going to talk about is Huatli Radiant Champion. This card can talk about silly. This can become an insane value engine in this deck. With Huatli, the coolest thing about the plus ability is you get loyalty counters based on the number of creatures you have. So we already know we can have a lot of wolf tokens in this deck. So we have a good amount of creatures. Even without the tokens, we're running a good number of creatures. So it's very easy to get Huatli into alt range. And if you alter, things get insane because every time a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to draw a card. Magical Christmas land here, but if you have your commander out, you get this emblem. You're playing all these wolves, all these wolf tokens are coming in, you're just drawing cards, fighting everything, gaining all this life. You can get in a commanding state by gaining all this life, you're having a silly life total, just getting rid of all your opponent's creatures. With this, just drawing all the cards you want. Looking at the lands, we're running 38, really just nothing crazy here. It's a very kind of basic Selesnya mana base with a decent amount of dual lands, a decent amount of basics, nothing crazy. But 2 cards that I do want to mention are Gavany Township and Oran Reef the Vastwood. These allow you to buff up your wolves. Unfortunately, it's not on the enter the battlefield, so you don't get the help with the fight trigger. But when you have a bunch of wolf tokens, and again, a lot of them aren't giant, getting to put all these +1 counters and kind of buff them up, you're going to do whatever you can to make it a bigger army. So these will go very well with the deck. All right, so now we're moving on to the best part, the game-winning step. How are we going to win the game with an army of wolves? How are we going to have Boja smacking people in the face? So how are we going to do it? This is how we're going to do it. So there's 2 cards that kind of serve the role of buffing your team and just trying to swing in with a giant team of just massive wolves. The number 1 card, no surprise here, Craterhoof Behemoth. I mentioned the word tokens, I mentioned the word creatures. We're going to run Craterhoof. The most efficient way to just end a game when you have a big board state. But there's another one I'm really excited to test out in a deck like this, and that's God Eternal Ronus. Now, nowhere near as efficient, especially in this deck, as Craterhoof because it only doubles the power, and we have a lot of 2/3 power creatures. But the whole text on this card that's really interesting is, as a commander, I didn't like it because it tucks itself. So it didn't matter. It was basically just going back to the command zone. But I feel like in this deck, that effect is awesome because if you have a big board of wolves, you double their power. Even if they're not massive, they're pretty big. You can swing, do some damage. Then 3 turns later, it's like a cloud going off. You get to cast it again and just make everything big again. So this is a card that I'm definitely excited to feel out and kind of see how it actually affects the dynamic of a game, especially with that recurability. But this is the perfect deck to test it out in. The next way to win the game, mentioned it earlier, not going to be, this is almost as unsurprising as Craterhoof, it's Aetherflux Reservoir. This card in this deck is insane because that's 3 life per wolf we can gain. And there's all these ways I just mentioned to get wolves, whether it's a few a turn. It's not insane to think about getting 4 or 5, even 6 wolves in a turn with some of these token generators. So you could just gain an insane chunk of life and out of nowhere be able to Aetherflux somebody. You could literally be in, 30 life and people think they're safe. And you could have an explosive turn or two and all of a sudden you're well within Aetherflux Reservoir, just shooting range, and you're holding somebody hostage. I talked about this a lot last week. It's not any less good now. This card's amazing. The last way to win the game in this deck is going to sound kind of strange, but it's survival. And with a deck like this, the power level inherently isn't going to be super high. But what's going to help you out, there's a number of things. It's going to be, one, you're not going to be a huge target. Two, you're gaining life throughout the game, so you're going to be able to kind of just get by. And when I say survival, I don't mean just trying to hide. You're going to have a lot of wolves. You're going to have a lot of creatures. You're going to have buffs with Coat of Arms, with a card like Cathru's Crusade, with a card like Shalai, where you can just put +1 counters on everything. Essentially, the best way to win in this deck, and I think the most consistent way to pull off wins, is to kind of stay under the radar, keep your life total high, remove problematic creatures that might be coming at you with Tolsimir's ability, and kind of sneakily get a scary board state and just be swinging and taking people down over the game. And before you know it, you could be at 30, 40 life, and everybody else is in that 10 to 15 range, not really seeing you as the threat. And all of a sudden, Cathru's Crusade with some tokens come out, and you can just swing out and kill somebody. I do think the ability of this deck, and I'm really excited to see how it works in practice, would be float under the radar and then just come in for the kill, which is super on theme for the whole wolf thing. As my cat sneakily comes in here as like a little prowling hunter. Perfect timing. But it's perfectly on theme with the whole wolf thing. The wolves are kind of hiding in the shadows, trying not to get noticed, being all sneaky and hunter-like, and then out of nowhere, they pounce and kill. And that's basically what we want to do with this deck. Well, that's going to do it for this week's deck tech. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. I've said it a few times. I really, really love decks that are really flavorful, that are super on theme. And I had a lot of fun building this deck, and I feel like to play it, get some fancy, especially I love whether you get like custom tokens done or you buy fancy tokens, getting a whole bunch of wolf tokens and just getting to play them out. I don't know. I feel like this deck could be a really, really good time. Obviously, for the more spiky competitive players, this might not be for you, but I mean, give it a shot, try to have some fun, and I think you'll enjoy it. Make sure to check out the full deck list down below. Let me know what you think. Are there some other Wolf Tribal cards I forgot about? I would love to hear about that, and I will see you guys next time.